So I will go ahead and start on the hour. Just want to make one last check that everybody can hear me.
Sounds good.
Great, thanks.
Yes.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started with the webinar. Welcome everybody. My name is John Wheeler and pleased to bring you this webinar through the Research Data Access and Preservation Association, RDAP, a radical collaboration in practice, an update from the Data Curation Network. Today we are going to hear from Lisa Johnston at the University of Minnesota, Hoa Luong from the University of Illinois, and Liza Coburn from the University of Minnesota about the current state and accomplishments of the Data Curation Network. We'll note that attendees are muted, but there is a chat feature available for Q&A that we'll be moderating at the end of the presentation. Also, slides and a recording of the webinar will be made available within the next few days. Before we begin, I'm going to hand it over to Hoa here in a second, but I just want to give acknowledgement and thank you to the Webinar Planning Committee from RDAP. That's Courtney Carney, Emily Kilser, and myself. And please be on the lookout for more webinars to come. We have another webinar coming up from the Data Curation Network in 2 weeks on the 22nd, Primerpalooza, and we'll be sending out more info about that directly. And so that's all for me. I'm going to hand it over to Hoa.
Thank you so much. Hi everyone, my name is Hoa Luong. I'm from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. We have joined the Data Curation Network since the beginning of the project in 2016. So before starting, I just want to say thanks to the RDAP for the opportunity and of course to everyone here for attending today. I'm going to start here by giving you a quick introduction about the DCN and then pass it to Liza, the DCN coordinator, to walk you through the DCN workflow and some statistics. And then Lisa, for the DCN PI, will end the talk today by talking about the vision and future plan. Next slide, please. Yep, so this is our picture. Yep, next slide. Thank you so much. So as we all know, data sharing is a big deal now due to the funder mandates, public service requirements, and other pressures. However, just providing access to data files without anything else, such as documentation, is clearly not enough, right? So in our repository at Illinois, the Illinois Data Bank, we often see most data is initially less than good. So this means the data initially not come with any documentation or even descriptions, and sometimes it's just poorly named. So often only data. So even though it is shared, but actually has become useless in those situations because who else can use it besides the person who created, right? Therefore, the curation plays an important role in adding more value to the data. And a well-curated data are valuable. The goal of data curation is to repair and maintain the research data throughout its life cycle of usefulness and in ways that make the data findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable for the FAIR principle. So by adding documentations and other related information, it's easier for fellow scholars and future collaborators to understand the data. Hence, it increases the potential collaborations. And by performing quality assurance check, it enhances the trust from scholars that this data is good to use and more likely to be reused, validated, and replicated. So those actions are associated with increased citation rate for the research impact. Next slide, please. So due to the heterogeneous and multidisciplinary nature of the research data generated in each each academic institutions, it is unrealistic to expect that every academic library can hire a data curator for every single data type, such as GIS, MATLAB, SPSS, or disciplinary specific data format like chemical spectra, 3D images, or genomic sequences. Plus, in order to meet the FAIR principle, specialized curatorial actions must be taken, so including quality assurance, file integrity checks, document review. Sometimes you have to do the code reviews and run the code, metadata creations, file transformation if needed in some cases. The skill and expertise required to curate those data cannot be reasonably be automated nor provided by a few experts at a single institutions. That is why the data curation network was formed. Next slide, please. So the goal of the data curation network is to enable academic libraries and data repositories to better support the researchers that are facing with growing number of requirements to ethically share their research data. The DCN is running on collaboratively shared data curation staff model. So the next slide, you will see the picture on the partner in the data curation network. So this is a funded project by Sloan Foundation. The whole network is built around collaboration and it's running like a gear in the machine. So we're using a staff sharing model. The John Hopkins image should not move around, so in the implementation phase in 2018 to 2021, there are 8 partners, institutions, and 1 repository. Each partner contributes 2 curators and a representative with some overlap in those roles. So there are also 3 administrative leads. So the data curation network is actually around 30 people, and there's a growing number in people attending to the data curation network. Each partner in the data curation network has their own data repository that build with different technology platforms. Researchers are increasingly required to share the data due to a different reasons, such as funder, journals, disciplinary practices, emphasize transparency and reproducibility. And sometimes they think that sharing data is a good idea for their reputation as a scholar. And as someone who works in this field, we have an interest, if not responsibility, to support this endeavor. Next slide is going to show you the process up to date of the data curation network. So in 2016 to 2017, the DCN was under planning phase with 6 original institutions. So there was a lot of discussions, research pilots to understand more what researchers need. In July 2017, the model was released for comments. And like I mentioned earlier, everything in this network runs together. So we have monthly meetings, we talk to each other, asking for suggestions, we share in the data. So collaboration is really a key here. And we are now in 3 years implementation phase with 8 institutions, 8 to 12 institutions, and 1 repository. So each partner will submit the data that they may not be able to curate. So for example, at Illinois, the library doesn't have a person who not only knows MATLAB, but also be able to curate that type of data. So hence we submit the MATLAB data set to the DCN, and it got assigned to a MATLAB expert from other partners within the network. So since time could be an issue sometimes, so I try to check with my researchers before submitting it and let them know that it could take a little bit longer. So far we have a great experience. The turnaround time is really quick and the result is good. So for the MATLAB case that I submitted to the DCN, my researcher was happy with the suggestions and they make changes based on that. And after the implementation phase, from 2020, 2021 and beyond, the network is going to open to new members and the end users. So now I'm going to pass it to Liza to talk about the Dcn workflow. Thank you.
Thanks, Hoa. My name is Liza Coburn. I'm the DCN project coordinator at the University of Minnesota. And I'm going to talk a bit about how the DCN works and some of the outcomes of our work so far. So I'm just going to start with a general overview of our partners repository workflow. So first, an uncurated data set is ingested by the local or partner repository. It will then go through some type of assessment process. Basically, our partners review the data set and determine if they have the appropriate expertise to curate it. So they look at the data type, the file format, subject area, or discipline. They're also considering if they have the time or the bandwidth to curate it locally. And then the answers to these questions help determine if it's a candidate for submission to the DCN for curation. So if they don't have the expertise or bandwidth, they may submit the data set to the DCN. If they do, they may curate it locally. There are a few other factors to consider, like the timeline, turnaround time for the data set, if it's a few days or a few weeks, sensitivity, if there's human subjects in the data set, etc. Either way, if they're submitting it to the DCN or it's locally curated, once curation is complete, it's reviewed, finalized, like a DOI is minted, researcher makes any changes, or the curator does, or any changes are signed off on, among other things. And then the data set's published or goes live in the local repository, and you have curated data. So I'm going to focus now on what happens when a data set is submitted to the DCN for curation. First, we're going to just review the curate steps in the Dcn workflow, or it might be a review for some of you. For others, it might be new. So data curation in the DCN revolves around the curate steps. In the course of curating a data set for the DCN, curators will apply file format specific and domain aware curation procedures with a baseline minimum of these steps. So they're the C step, which is check the data files and read documentation, understand the data or try to. If they're not able to, then they request missing information or changes. They augment the submission with metadata for findability, or make recommendations about augmentation. They may transform file formats for reuse and long-term preservation, or make recommendations about transformations. And then there's an evaluation. They evaluate and rate the overall submission for fairness, as Hoa talked a bit about. So onto the DCN workflow. We use Atlassian's Jira software for tracking data sets throughout the DCN workflow. So this includes making assignments, mediating access to data sets, documenting curation work that's performed, collecting metrics. And we started with a pretty complex workflow, so many steps, I think maybe 6 to 8, and we've simplified it quite a bit based on what worked and what didn't. We try to be pretty agile and responsive to what our curators need and want. And so now we just have these 4 steps, or 4 statuses in Jira. So when a data set is submitted to the network, an issue or ticket is created, and then it progresses through these 4 steps. So coordinator review, in curation, local review, and then finally it's closed. So we'll go through this in some more detail. I apologize if the print is a little bit small. But first, the local curator, or the person submitting, will create an issue in Jira. So basically they log into Jira, they fill out a form that we've created with some information about the data set they're submitting. So the most important parts of this are the due date, an access link to the data, anything they've already done, any pre-DCN curation actions, format types of the data, general data type if it's an image or it's code, discipline, and then we also ask why they're submitting, just so we can kind of keep track. Then once they hit the submission button, everyone on the project is notified, everyone gets an email, and it's assigned to the project coordinator, which is me. So once I get the notification, I enter the system and do a bit of triage. So I'm evaluating to make sure the ticket's complete, all the information is there, making sure the data set is accessible. People who submit data sets do so in a number of ways. Sometimes it's like just a link to their repository. People put it in Box. We've had it in Google Drive. We're agnostic. We just want a link that's accessible. So I check and make sure that it is. And then depending on the data type, format, discipline, curator availability, to the best of my knowledge, and capacity, like if they've curated a data set for us recently or not, I assign it to a curator. Once it's accepted, I transition the issue to the in curation status. And a few notes here about the assignment process. We regularly survey our curators to assess the expertise contained within the network. So we plan to continue to do this every 6 months or so. We've done it twice already. And we do this so that we can keep track as expertise and interest change, staff turnover occurs, and as we add new members. We do this assessment. And then I maintain matrices of this expertise, and we assess for disciplinary expertise, data type expertise, and file type format expertise where appropriate. So this is file type and format mostly applies to code. We want to know if someone can handle R or MATLAB or Python. That's kind of important. We also ask people for their special interests because we want to know what our curators are interested in looking at and working on, because I think that impacts satisfaction. So these matrices that I maintain are open to everyone on the project, and they can make changes if they want between assessments. We also track curator satisfaction with each data set they curate for the DCN, so we can tweak things as well and keep that in mind if they had a good time or not so good time curating data set. So that's just a little aside on that. So in the curation step, when they're ready, the curator accesses the data set using the link and curates it following the Curate protocol. And then they keep in mind any special instructions or requests from the submitting local curator. So we collect that, we let people make special notes, the local curators, if it's code and they want the code run, or if there's something that they know should have an extra close look, they can indicate that. So there may be some back and forth between both curators, and the coordinator mediates this process, and all that communication happens in the ticket within JIRA. So you can leave comments on tickets and it notifies the correct person, and it's really pretty seamless. It's working well so far. So once the curators finish curating, they fill in more information on that form in JIRA in the ticket. So they're documenting the curation process and reporting their findings, and most importantly, making recommendations. They're also reporting their curation time. So once they've filled all of this out, they transition the ticket back to local review, which assigns it back to me, the coordinator. I come back in and review it for completion. And then as long as everything is complete, then I assign it to the local curator who submitted it for them to review. At this point, we consider the work of the DCN to be complete. It's back in the local curator or the local partner repository's court. And the ticket will just kind of hang out in here while the local curator reports the results of the curation to the researcher, makes whatever changes need to be made, or whatever needs to happen. This could be days, it could be months. It's not really bothersome to us. We check in every once in a while to see how things are progressing. But eventually, hopefully, the data set will be finalized, which means that it's again made public in the local repository. So the local curator at that point will return to JIRA to report what happened and kind of close the loop for us. So if the researcher accepted the recommendations or they didn't, they let us know that. They let us know what additional curation actions were performed. And they provide us with the final DOI. Then they transition the issue to the closed status, and at that point they can export it if they want in PDF or XML, and that will also capture all the comment history. So if they want to add it as a data stream to their repository or insert it in their curation log, or again, however they track that kind of work locally, they can do that at that time, or they can do it later because the tickets aren't deleted. They're archived in the system for future reference and posterity. So yeah, and then we also add some information about each finalized data set to our website. So we include a citation, the DOI, which is linked to the local repository page for that data set. We point out who curated it, which is both the local curator and the DCN curator. And we associate it, and we list the curation actions that are performed. So you can see hopefully discovery services, documentation, evaluate fairness. There is a list of those on our website as well, but each of those is also a button that that links to them so you can see the definition. So that's a little bit more of what we do. And here's just some results so far, early results. We've only really been up and running about 6 months. So we've curated 28 data sets so far since we went live, and that was about mid-January. Of these 28, 27 were successfully curated. One we did have to reject because we couldn't turn it around by the deadline. So it's only happened the one time, which is pretty great. Most of the data sets we've received so far have been in the life sciences. So this is mostly biology, ecology, and health sciences. And luckily, this is where a large proportion of our expertise lies. We've also received a lot of physical sciences data sets so far. Mostly these are chemistry and earth and environmental sciences, and we have quite a bit of expertise in those subject areas as well. And then look at the data types we've received. A note about this, most data sets contain multiple types of data. So we see a lot of code, a lot of tabular, and often there's a little bit of each in code data sets. We've seen a lot of MATLAB code as well as some R code, and we do have a fair amount of expertise in those types of code, which is great. As Hoa mentioned, they didn't have any MATLAB expertise at Illinois, so they submitted to the network, and we've been able to curate it for them. Let's see, I guess that's all there. Just a few more little results. As I mentioned, we curated 27 data sets so far, and 22 of these have been finalized, which means curation's complete, changes have been made, and the data set was published. And these have since been added to our website. So this chart just represents those finalized data sets, and also some of what we know about the DCN's impact. So for maybe 9%, 2 of these 22 no curation actions were taken. And this is for various reasons. It's doesn't reflect poorly on the curator or the researcher. It's just often there are time constraints, especially if these data sets are associated with publications. They just have to be published, and there may not be time, but they may revisit and do some more work later. For another 9% or another 2, minimal curation actions were taken. So these are small metadata edits or additions. For 15 of the 22, 68% major curation actions were taken, which is great. So this is files were updated or added or removed, metadata was edited or added or removed, and major documentation changes. And finally, for 3 of the 22 or 14%, essential curation actions were taken. So these are major errors were corrected, or the author's reputation was saved. Or the data set was going to be rejected, or it was rejected if actions weren't taken. So basically, I mean, for a majority of the data sets that have been finalized, over 80% of them, the expert curation provided by DCN curators resulted in significant curation actions, which is a great thing to see. And there are some additional outcomes. The DCN is not only about curating data sets, we're building a community of data professionals and curation experts. We rely on each other for help curating data sets, but we also network, support each other, make friends, problem solve. We share tools and tips, and we learn from one another. We've developed a number of communication channels to facilitate engagement and, of course, communication with each other, individually and as a group. So we use Google Groups as our listserv, probably send out at least 1 email a week, usually quite a few more than that. We use Slack for instant messaging, and we've integrated Jira so that certain activities like the creation and closure of a data set are announced automatically in the general Slack channel. And as I've already mentioned, we use Jira for tracking our curation work. And there's a dashboard where we report statistics. So anyone in the network with a Jira account, which is pretty much everyone, can access the details of any ticket at any time pretty easily through the dashboard or browse through issues. And then we use WordPress for our website, and we have a blog there that anyone can follow, and we do post the results of finalized data sets. We also hold meetings, weekly stand-ups for our curators, and an annual all-hands meeting in Minneapolis for all project personnel. Our next one is actually coming up next week. And then we try to coordinate meetings at conferences. We also have a sister IMLS grant focused on specialized data curation education workshops. and there'll be a webinar on that in a few weeks. We also plan to start holding regular skill building webinars later this year, where we'll ask that curators with particular skills with tools, methodologies, or certain data types present to anyone who's interested. There's also some interest in making those public. We have a lot of other ideas about ways in which we can learn from each other and share what we've learned with the broader community. And yeah, so that's it for me. Now I'm going to turn it over to our PI, Lisa Johnston, to talk more about the future of the network.
Great, thank you so much, Liza. So my name is Lisa Johnston, and I am at the University of Minnesota and the principal investigator of the Data Curation Network grant-funded project. This is a 3-year grant-funded project through the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation. So just to give you a sense of where we're at in that project, we have launched the network. Everything that you've heard so far today, we've accomplished basically in the last year. The project really kicked off last June, and we set up all of those technologies that you saw through the JIRA system, set up our website, set up our workflows. We trained all of our curator staff, and then we started doing curation. We started our shared curation model in January of this year, and those metrics are starting to come out about the efficiencies of sharing curation staff across multiple institutions and repositories. Going forward, we have a lot more work to do. We will be really thinking this year in year 2 about the sustainability of the project. How can we continue to incrementally grow and add new expertise, but also be able to provide data curation services, not just for our member organizations, but for end users or other institutions who might not have the staffing available to do their own data curation, but need access to some of these experts. So for that, we're going to be really testing the value proposition of, is data curation a service that would be available for other institutions to buy into or become a member of. We also have we have hired a sustainability consultant. We're working with Lyrasis to help us identify, what is that value proposition? What is that market research for data curation? We will also be engaging an advisory panel. We've got a great group of experts outside of the Data Curation Network who represent institutions that aren't like ours. Because if you look at the DCN right now, we all look pretty similar in that we are large organizations who have been doing data curation for a number of years now. But we also know that there are lots of institutions who are, doing this type of work, but maybe they don't have a large staff, or maybe they don't have their own repository. They're using external repositories, domain repositories, general repositories. So we really want to better understand, how can we build partnerships across multiple different use cases and work with each other and establish a network that goes beyond sort of the similar institutions that you've seen here. With that, we also want to, in year 3, expand the network and really be able to onboard new members who have an interest in data curation and expertise in data curation that really expand what we're doing and expand what we're thinking about, because we really see this as a community that can grow and adapt and really be useful for everybody in the network. With that, I'll go to the next slide. And just talk a little bit about our vision. And this is still, evolving as we've really kind of put the rubber to the road here. We're seeing the need for a data curation network that goes beyond what we originally imagined. We are sharing our experts just as we set out to do, and that is working. But we're also seeing a lot of other opportunities for us to collaborate, and that's sort of that radical collaboration aspect where we are really growing the idea of what it means to work together. So I am really excited. The outcomes of the DCN so far have been that we have been relying on each other in a true partnership. We are trusting other staff at other institutions to do the work that we need to do locally. And that has been such an exciting thing. And on that, I think, establishes a really great layer of trusting each other, respecting each other. And the DCN has become an incubator for new ideas and new partnerships and new kinds of collaboration. I think one of the interesting takeaways for me is that not only have we at Minnesota received, really great curation expertise from all the members of the network, but we've also been able to learn from each other. We've learned from each other's experiences in sort of the broader data services space, and I think there's some real value in that. So how can we explore that? How can we grow as a project? So for the next slide, I'll just share some of these ideas. The first one is the Dcn Curation as a service. So this idea is really something that we've thought about for a long time now, but not just to have a traditional membership model where, we're all members, we all have staff that are doing data curation, therefore we can all share each other's staff. But to broaden up that membership model in ways that allow individual or institutional users to gain access to the network, maybe on a fee-for-service basis, maybe another way. We have not worked out all the details. But we really want to be able to provide data curation out to others as a service. We also want to, if we go to the next slide, build a broad base of the data curator community. So through this, Liza had already mentioned, we have a separate IMLS grant that's led by Cynthia Hudson Batali at Penn State University. And what our team on the education side has been doing is hosting free workshops available to anybody in the community who's interested in specialized data curation. We go through the very similar training that we teach our DCN curators, using our Curate steps as that framework. And then we invite people to share their expertise around particular data types and specialized data file formats. And so with that, what we're producing are these things called data curation primers. And you'll see an example here. This one was created by Susan Borda at University of Michigan. This primer is on netcdf files. And so it's a multi-page document that is really meant to be an introduction to a file type so that a curator might better be able to review that file and curate it for the repository. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about this because we've got another webinar ready for you in 2 weeks, July 22nd. And that's going to be at 2 p.m. Eastern. I see this, Hannah, our project coordinator for that project, has already tweeted that out or chatted that out. So that's going to be, we're going to be releasing all of the primers that have come out of the first cohort. And there will be 3 cohorts of primers. So we'll continue to be releasing those new primers as they become available. And that's been a really exciting way to collaborate in the community on something that I think is going to be really useful, and it's already useful to us as curators. So the next slide is just the area around advocacy. It's been really interesting with this project as we're going out and we're talking to people and presenting at conferences. We're getting approached by a community of individuals and organizations that go beyond what maybe I would have considered as our scope. People who are working for institutes that maybe are not library-based, that are not repository-based, but are interested in the role of curation. Researchers who are doing data curation themselves, who are really concerned or interested in the usability of data. So I really see this role for the libraries and archives world to be an advocate for the value of curation and to talk to funders, to talk to publishers about the role that we play as we're providing not just the persistent platform for data, not just the home for data, but all of the human effort that goes into making sure that those data are usable and persist for the long term. So really being advocates for the role of a data curator as a profession. And that advocacy could turn into a lot of different things. It could be, that we band together and respond to RFIs coming out of the funding agencies. Or that, we can establish some principles or guidelines for some of the, wage disparities that we're starting to see for data curators in our profession. So really thinking broadly about that, of how can we work collaboratively, how can we work across our institutions to be advocates for data curation and data curators in particular. The next slide, just a little bit of our R&D work. So some of the research that we've been doing has been really fascinating. In our early phase in 2016, we went out and did focus groups with researchers to better understand, do researchers value curation? Do they value the steps that curators take? And the answer was certainly yes. And they value it in a lot of interesting ways, mainly because they feel that they are also doing this work. So how can we partner with individual researchers on the actual practice of curation? We also did some research with ARL, where we did a spec kit on data curation, looking across the different ARL institutions to better understand the levels of curation support that each institution is providing and what that looks like. And then finally, here's some just preliminary analysis that's coming out of some research that we're calling the value of curation, where we're looking at how do we measure the impact of a data set that was reviewed by a curator versus a data set that, in this case, was self-deposited to a repository and was never reviewed by one of our professional curators. And this is just the monthly download statistics for a collection of data sets by the same authors group. So a lab produced 77 data sets, and we see a difference. At least here, just preliminary, we're seeing the difference in download stats of the curated data sets versus the non-curated. So really a lot of options here to come together, to form interest groups, and to do additional research around these different topics that we are dealing with as practitioners in the data curation space. And then finally, this is another kind of future-looking topic where we have had a lot of interest from institutions around getting, understanding what is the maturity path for data curation services. There are lots of ways that an institution can move toward data curation as a service, either with a local repository or with a general repository that you're relying on, or domain repositories that you are partnering with or pointing your researchers to. There are a lot of different pathways. And I think we have a lot of expertise in the data curation network about taking those different pathways. I look across our current partners, and each one of us are offering different types of services. We're using different types of repository technology platforms. We all have different staffing models, and they all work in their own ways. And it's just really fascinating to kind of get a sense of that scope or that scale of how curation can be done in different ways, but still be aligned in the value systems that we've established for ourselves. So we've been really contemplating how can the DCN as a program, as a network, help institutions think about that maturity pathway for data curation services and move up that maturity model and take a little baby steps forward at implementing some of these services. And I would certainly see a role for each of our individuals in the network to help share their expertise in that way. Liza mentioned we have an expertise matrix for our curator skills, who has the skill sets in MATLAB versus Python. I can also see a role in the DCN for expertise in a broader variety of consultative skills in data curation topics like data visualization or repository setup in particular platforms. So I think there are a lot of opportunities there and a lot of interest or need in learning from your peers and that sort of that peer-to-peer consultation and then ultimately collaboration. So with that, those are some of our ideas for the future. And so you got a little glimpse of everything that we've been doing to date. We've got a number of new projects that we are hoping to start going forward. We've got our all hands meeting next week, which I'm really excited to see everybody gathering here in Minneapolis. And I would welcome any questions for the three of us now.
Great, thank you, Hoa, Liza, and Lisa. And everyone, attendees can feel free to go ahead and tap questions into the chat for us, and we'll be sure to pass those on to the presenters. And while people are loading up their questions, you know, one of the things I find really interesting about this is how you've developed sort of this network of expertise and sort of a technical and technological infrastructure for, you know, curating. This is a very high touch process, curating data and achieving, you know, efficiencies and economies of scale through this. One of the questions I have is, you discuss communication within your community and within the project. I'm curious how you're promoting the services to the researchers at the participating institutions. Is there a standard approach there, or is everyone sort of feeling their way with that?
Well, I can take a stab from that and then maybe pass it over to Hoa, who will have a different take on it because we're each doing it differently. We actually did do interviews with each of the partner institutions and ask them that very question. Are you letting end users, researchers know that the data curation network is curating your data and not somebody who's sitting right there on campus? And each institution is taking a different approach. So some institutions are asking researchers beforehand whether or not, you know, do you mind if one of our partners in the DCN will curate this data? Other people are informing them after the fact and saying, oh, you know, our partner at Illinois was able to take a look at this for you. And some people are just really, you know, keeping that a little bit obfuscated just intentionally because it's just that layer of, well, we're all curators and we're all trying to provide this as a service to you. And usually the researchers aren't going to necessarily need to know all the details for how that happens. So it's been we want to leave it open for a lot of flexibility for people to still do their own service and to, you know, run things how they want to locally. And then maybe just getting a little bit more to what you were saying about promotion. I think each institution is promoting their services differently across campus too. And I think that's a whole other challenge area for many of us of how do you get the word out? How do you get the attention of your researchers to let them know that we're here, we're providing this service, and I think in most cases we're providing the service completely free to all of our university or faculty researchers. So I turn it over to Hoa, maybe if you have anything you want to add to that.
Yes. So at Illinois, we support for transparency. So like we normally will just inform the researchers as like, is it okay for us to submit it to the data curation network to curate just because we don't have any expert in this type of format. So, and then also depend on the time too. So sometimes the researcher has a really like short timeline, which like it will be like an issue here because like we don't want to delay any of their work. So we just have to make sure that like they have like the time long enough for us to like submit it to the DCN. So yeah, so we afterwards, so we asked to make sure that like everything is okay and like we submit it to the DCN. We also doing some talk about the DCN at here too. So like we last semester, we got invited by the iSchool at Illinois, so to talk about the data curation network. So it's kind of like a way for us to like promote the DCN to like our campus.
Okay, great, thank you. So we have a question from Jonathan Petters. Is one sustainability possibility post-award that each group or institution in the DCN would pay into its support? It seems all data curation participants could clearly benefit from such a scheme.
Sure, I can take that. Hi, Jonathan. Yeah, I definitely think that that is a model that we want to look at, that membership, traditional membership model. We do have central costs. You know, we do have to pay JIRA, we have to pay WordPress. And so those costs can be shared across the member institutions. I don't think that's kind of the only way we're looking at it though. We've been doing some preliminary research asking different, you know, people in charge of the budget, you know, what is the likelihood that they might want to pay into something like this? And there's a lot of membership fatigue out there. So we're also looking at ways that maybe we could, you know, offset those costs with other models. And that's why we've definitely engaged a sustainability consultant to help us think through a lot of those different financial models and just kind of talk through what that might look like. So yes, the answer is that is definitely a possibility.
Okay, and another question from Megan Goodchild. Could you comment on the workload for curators? Are you anticipating that certain curators will be in high demand due to specialized skill set? Do you see certain gaps, for example, support for specific disciplines, software, et cetera, that you may need to address with training or capacity building within the network?
That sounds like a great question for Liza, our project coordinator.
Yeah, sure. So the workload is, I mean, each curator or each partner commits a certain amount of time, like percentage FTE. So typically they come on board with 2 curators, and they range from like what, 2% to 5%, I think. So that's really just a few hours a month. And so far we've been able to spread out the workload, spread out the data sets, because we have been kind of, it's a slow roll in our launch. Again, we've just done 28. So I kind of keep an eye on that. You know, I've been trying to kind of spread the love, so to say, which is to give everyone a shot at a data set if I can match the expertise. But since we do see a lot of code, and we do see like a lot of life sciences, you know, there are places where there is higher demand. We're collecting metrics, and we're tracking like what people are submitting, so that we can you know, plan for that on if, oh, everyone's going to be sending their hard MATLAB to the DCN, then, you know, we would know, oh, we need more MATLAB. Right now we're just in a trial kind of test period. So we just have what we have as far as curation expertise. But maybe down the line, we would kind of have an idea of what our members would be sending us, and we would try to fill those gaps or add more curators. Yes, we do see high demand for certain skill sets, and I would definitely say code, for example, is one of them. And we do have some gaps. We've been able to make everything work. We do assess curator satisfaction. So, you know, there's a little bit of mental gymnastics that have to happen with each assignment. So, you know, we first look at data type. So if it's code or if it's an image, and then we look at, you know, the format or subtype, if it's a 3D image as opposed to just a general photograph or something. With code, you know, we look at what type of software, if it's R or MATLAB. And I lost my train of thought there. But yeah, we look at all of that, and then that's the kind of the first hurdle to jump when assigning. And then we look at discipline, if it's life sciences code, or if it's physics or mathematics code or statistics or something. And then we just assign it the best that we can, and we assess satisfaction. We ask them, was that appropriate for you based on data type? Was it appropriate based on discipline? And then, you know, we kind of have that negotiation just to make sure we're all on the same page with expertise. And then we do want to do more training. And, you know, we want to, like we said, we want to share the skills, and I think our curators want to share their skills with other people. So we're still kind of figuring out the best way to do that and getting that off the ground. We do some of that skilling up in person at the all hands meetings. And going forward, we want to do some like specialized webinars. You know, we ask people what they're interested in. And, you know, a lot of people are interested in de-identification or working with human subjects data. So we have some people who are expert in that, and we want to leverage their expertise and share it with the network and hopefully with the public. So that's definitely an interest area, and we see the need. So yeah, hopefully I didn't ramble too much and answer that. Yeah, cool, thanks.
Great, thank you. And a question from Ashley Jester. Are the curators doing the work in the DCN being given time to contribute to this project by their local institution, or are people volunteering outside of work?
I would hate to think of a future where people are doing work outside of work. No, since right now we're grant funded, so everybody is written in on the grant, and they have a percentage of their time, which is cost shared on the grant. So everybody is contributing to the project with approval from their institution via subawards. So it's quite formalized, and we're tracking all of that time that goes into it. And we're also tracking, as Liza said, how many hours people are curating, so that they don't max themselves out or be overutilized. So I do hope that we can continue that as we transition to a sustainable data curation network that's not just purely grant funded. I think MOUs might be one avenue that we could take with that to establish sort of that memorandum of understanding of how much people are contributing, and really try to stay away from this is, you know, something that we're volunteering to do outside of work hours. I don't think that's what we would like to move forward with. So that does take a bit of discussion, right, with your institution. We need institutions to be on board with this work and to acknowledge this work, because it's not quick. It is, you know, there is a, as Jonathan said, it's a very high-touch process. And we also want to make sure we're giving credit for all the work that people are committing. So we're trying to research better ways to highlight the fact that, you know, this person spent a lot of time on this and really added value to this. How do we reflect that, not just on the DCN's website, but maybe it needs to go into the record metadata. Maybe it needs to be, you know, displayed on the record itself somehow, or something that indicates that this is, this was, you know, there was a lot of contribution that went into this beyond just the authorship of the data authors. So more research to work on that particular piece.
Great, thank you. And Ewan Cochran has asked, he heard the answer about telling researchers about sharing data within the DCN and has a related question to that. Have you been provided data to process that has HIPAA or high security confidentiality requirements?
That's a great question. And the answer is yes, but not intentionally. So currently all the partners in the DCN run public access repositories. That's not to say, though, that we wouldn't be able to do curation for data that was not meant for one of those public access repositories. We just really haven't created that workflow quite yet. I think that's an area of need and an area of interest for many people in the network. To answer your question, though, specifically, I think researchers do sometimes share data that might not have been meant for sharing, and that's a part of the review process. That's really one of the best things that a curator can do, is to stop or prevent sharing that should not have, you know, that inadvertent sharing. So, for example, we'll review all the files and make sure that there aren't any files in the data set that contain any identifiers. For example, some of our institutions use software to run against the files that'll look across them for traditional identifying information. Identity Finder is one tool that we've used in the past here in Minnesota. We also ask for the data sharing agreement. So this is the participant agreement that typically goes to the IRB, and it's a statement that's given to all the participants that describes how the data will be shared. So even if it's a de-identified data set, which is all we've seen so far, we've never seen anything HIPAA related, as you mentioned in your question, but we have seen data that was not supposed to be shared according to the participant agreement. So the participant agreement said something very restrictive, such as, these data will never be seen again by anyone other than myself and my graduate assistant. And then they go ahead and share it in a repository because they're meeting their funder requirements or their journal requirements. So those are the ways that we can help a researcher just, you know, realign their sharing expectations. Usually for the next time around, we can't really work around that participant agreement unless they reconsent everyone, and that's something we've certainly suggested in the past. So yeah, it's not something that we are currently set up for, but we definitely are running into it, and hoping to, you know, make sure that we're keeping everybody sharing their data as ethically as possible.
And I'll just add on to that real quick that specifically, I mean, I think we've had a few data sets come through where our DCN curator caught things, but also I think my sense is that, as Lisa mentioned, the local curators and the local repositories are de-identifying and doing that check before they send it to the network, like they do some other things sometimes. But I think the really highly sensitive stuff, at least from a few of our partners that I've talked to, that might be something that it's just too risky and they just hold it back from the network as well. So. I know that's been the case one time. So just an addendum.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you for that response. So that's all the questions right now, and we'll give folks a few more minutes to type in their questions. And while we wait, I have another question about, do you see any sort of potential, so I was thinking, Lisa, when you were showing the slide about the figure in terms of the downloads of curated data versus self-submitted data, you know, I was thinking about the data seal of approval, which is applied to repositories, right? Is there any potential that you see towards advocacy or promoting the DCN of sort of, I don't know, maybe like a fair seal or some way to state openly on a repository page that these data have been curated by the DCN, and promote the collaboration through those kinds of means, and also to promote, you know, fair data practices?
Yes, definitely. Badges for curated data is certainly an area of interest in the DCN that has come up multiple times in our all hands meeting as we're brainstorming, you know, areas that we could take the project or direct some research attention toward. I think it's a really large space right now in terms of applying the seal of approval or the FAIR standards. And I'm not sure if it is sort of bubbled down a little bit so that we kind of see some clear indicators of what is valuable for researchers. So that's really where I'm kind of paying attention. And, you know, what does it mean anything to a researcher to see a seal of approval if they don't know what that is, what is behind that, or how that will really help them establish trust in their data or help them establish trust with their funder? I think those are the concerns that we have and that we are continuing to monitor and watch. But ultimately, yes, I think there is certainly going to be some value in having a tag or a badge or a metadata field that we can add to the data sets that indicate that this has achieved some level of review that maybe other data sets have not.
Great, thank you. So we haven't had any more questions come in, and we are getting close to the hour. So we may go ahead and wrap up. We'll be here for a few minutes to see if any other questions come in. But as we finish up, I just want to take a second to thank Hoa and Liza and Lisa again for presenting to us on the progress and the status of the Data Curation Network. Yeah, it was helpful and very informative, and I think it really, for me, it was interesting. It's sort of laying a path forward for moving beyond sort of siloed services to network services. And I also want to thank Courtney and Emily for supporting the webinar process, promoting the webinar and helping put it together. And yeah, if there are no other questions, we can thank everyone, and we will make the recording available, like I said, within the next few days.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you all.